Come with us on a musical journey through some of the most magnificent places on earth. Great towns and cities of Europe, steeped in history and beauty, and resounding with the stories and music of the world's great composers. Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Grieg, Vivaldi, Tchaikovsky. Just some of the greats in our classical destinations.
Hello, I'm Simon Callow, and I'm inviting you to join me on a musical and scenic journey to some of Europe's most beautiful places. We'll be following in the footsteps of the great classical composers, exploring their worlds, rediscovering their music. In fact, here today, I'm in the house of Jean Sibelius, our featured composer, the very place where he composed some of his most inspired music. But first, let's meet our other guides on the tour, who are just down the road, in front of a rather famous landmark.
Welcome to Classical Destinations. I'm Matt Wills, and today we're in Helsinki, the capital of Finland.
Helsinki has a magical blend of art and nature, and we're going to have great fun exploring it, along with the music of Jean Sibelius.
Finland has a population of 5.2 million, 20% of whom live in the Helsinki metropolitan area. Nearly 80% of Finland is either water or forest. Our journey will go from Helsinki, then flying north to Rovaniemi, the capital of Lapland, before we return to just north of Helsinki and the town, the home and museum of composer Jean Sibelius.
This is the Hotel Camp, quite a renowned institution in Helsinki. Completed in 1887, the Hotel Camp has a great many stories to tell, and Jean Sibelius was probably responsible for most of them.
Over the past 100 years or so, the fates of the Hotel Camp and Finland have been closely knit together. The restaurants of the hotel have provided a beautiful setting for fabulous parties. The identity of the emerging Finnish nation was blueprinted at the camp. Important political issues have been decided and significant deals closed at its tables. The camp has a varied history. At one point in the middle of the last century, it was doubtful that the old place would survive, but survive it has, and under the present owners has been faithfully and painstakingly restored to many of its original specifications.
But an old building is just an old building without the history of the lives which passed through. And one of those lives is that most famous of Finnish composers, Jean Sibelius.
Johann Julius Christian Sibelius was born in Hämeenlinna, about 100 kilometers north of Helsinki, on December the 8th, 1865. His dissolute alcoholic father died when he was 2, leaving the rest of the family, himself, his elder sister, and young pregnant mother, Maria Carlotta, with a mountain of debt. They went to live with Maria Carlotta's mother, having lost all but a few of their earthly possessions to bankruptcy. At the time, Finland was part of the Russian Empire and was divided into two distinct classes of educated and uneducated. Most formal education was in Swedish, but change was in the air.
In 1873, the first Finnish language school opened its doors in his hometown, and in a moment of foresight, his mother enrolled him. Now, this was very important for young Sibelius, because it opened up a whole new world of Finnish mythology to him, which fired his imagination and became foundational for much of his later work. About 30 years before Sibelius was born, a group of traditional Finnish folk songs and poems were gathered into one volume called the Kalevala. Now, the richness of this literature and its pathos were transformed by Sibelius into a 5-movement symphonic poem based on Kullervo.
Jean, however, was not like this. A dreamer with a passionate love for nature and an extraordinary imagination, he was also given to sudden changes of mood, from excitable play to deep melancholy. Seems he had a gentle heart and an affectionate nature, but was not brilliant academically. But he had a passion for music and played the violin well. After finishing school in 1885, Sibelius came to Helsinki to study law. At the same time, he enrolled here, the Helsinki Music Institute, now the Sibelius Academy, and within a very short time, his legal studies faded from view. Though he dreamed of a career as a violin virtuoso, his time here convinced Sibelius that his future was in composition rather than performance. In 1889, his first masterpiece, the string quartet in A minor, was performed. Sibelius continued his studies in Berlin and Vienna while making his first sketches of the symphonic poem Kullervo. He conducted its first performance here in Helsinki in the spring of 1892. It was a resounding success, launching Sibelius's career as an orchestral composer and conductor. Sibelius's music sounds as if it has been exhaled from the earth and blown directly into our ears from those ancient Finnish forests and frozen lakes. And people recognize his quality as soon as Sibelius burst onto the scene as a young man in the 1890s. He was absolutely the right person at the right time for the Finns, who after centuries of being in the middle of a territorial and cultural tug-of-war between the Russians and the Swedes, wanted their independence. They wanted to return to their own customs and speak their own language again. Sibelius became their standard-bearer, delving for inspiration into his country's vast and wide-ranging folk poetry, epic the Kalevala. Unlike his contemporaries, Vaughan Williams and Bela Bartok, he doesn't recycle folk music. Those dark, enraptured melodies and that otherworldly sound are all his own. Take a work like The Swan of Tuonela. Sibelius wrote it in 1893. Tuonela, according to Finnish legend, is the Isle of the Dead, surrounded by the dark waters of a lake on which floats a single swan. Cold, dark, misty, altogether bleak. Sibelius uses the cor anglais to be the swan. It makes a very good swan, to gliding over the motionless waters. Time, even breath, is suspended. You get the impression that all rhythm has been removed from the music, leaving just mood. One doesn't expect much dancing, after all, on an island where everyone is dead. In June 1892, he married Aino Järnefelt in her parents' home, and with that became a part of one of the most aristocratic and well-known Finnish-speaking families. Sibelius had 6 daughters. One of them, Kirsti, died of typhoid as an infant. Despite these trials and the fact that there wasn't much money until later, Aino endured it all and was a wonderful mother and grandmother. Sibelius's granddaughter Satu Jalas, daughter of Margareta Sibelius and Jussi Jalas, has special memories of her loving grandparents.
When we were a child, he received us in the morning. He was still in bed after reading newspapers. We were perhaps outside, and then my grandmother called, "Now you can come and greet Grandpa." And then we came there and then, "Hello, how are you?" And then always, "What did you dream this night?" And then I said, "Perhaps some birds." I thought, where were these birds? Did they sing or did they fly? We had to, every detail we had to tell him. I played to him something. Sometimes he took my thumb, for instance, and just plucked a little, and then he said, "What a tiny little finger, it must grow. You must go to Helmi and give some some food, that it becomes bigger." All his life he has walked so much in the forests. He was really very, very fond of nature. He needed and he listened to all the sounds, all the possible sounds and all the small details, and also the very big sea without shore and sky and colors. It is really, he had fantastic view of everything which surrounded him.
Helsinki is a good-natured city. It's small enough to have not to grapple with issues of pollution and traffic jams, but big enough to support a significant local culture. Of course, it helps if the people are friendly, and they are. Now, I found that the term classical music connotes the wrong sort of thing to many people. They think that it's not only supposed to be out of their intellectual league, but also that it's anchored way back in the past, disconnected from today. That's not at all how they feel about it here in Finland. Classical music is alive and well, and the composer Aino-Juhani Rautavaara is living proof. His works are played all over the world, convincing audiences to share his belief that great music is a glimpse of eternity through the window of time. Rautavaara gave up a window of his time to talk to classical destinations at his home in Helsinki.
Really, I think that even politicians and even businessmen consider music important. I think this too we have to thank Jean Sibelius for, because everybody knows how important his music has been in making Finland known internationally. He was extremely sensitive to criticism, and he still was criticized quite heavily till the very end, especially in Germany, in Sweden, and that his self-criticism was growing year after year, until he burned off the score of his 8th symphony, which was there already. And that must have been 1942, during the war. He burned it. That's what his widow told later.
Finland's a land of extremes. In summer, all around here, people are sunning themselves on harbour beaches, but even then, up north in Lapland, it can be snowing.
The flight from Finland's capital, Helsinki, to Rovaniemi takes us due north over 700 kilometers, or 433 miles. There are many daily flight options. Flight time to reach this winter or summer wonderland is 80 minutes. But on arrival, you've entered another world. A world full of nature's finest offerings, vistas and landscapes. Lapland stretches across the northerly regions of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and into Russia. Santa's head office is right here in Rovaniemi, and this is his village. Unmissable.
This cable above me marks the imaginary line which fills the heart with awe. This is the Arctic Circle, and everything north of this line in midsummer is bathed in perpetual daylight, while in midwinter there's no sun at all.
The Sami people have lived here for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. They used to be called Laps by most. This is now considered derogatory by many Sami. While one would not immediately associate Lapland with outdoor activities, it's remarkable how energetic one can become in order to work up a sweat in this culture. This is a stunning winter holiday destination. You can visit a reindeer park, or embark on a dog sleigh ride if you're game, or settle for a peaceful horse-driven sleigh ride in the forest. They even play golf here on the frozen rivers. Now that's serious. Personally, I'd rule the line at water sports, but some Finns just love it.
When you just see the beauty of this place, it gives you a bit of an indication and understanding of how men like Sibelius and Rautavaara could be so inspired by the beauty of the Finnish countryside that surrounded them. From the time they were married in 1892, Aino and John Sibelius lived in about 10 different places in Helsinki and nearby Kerava, not to mention the summers spent with friends and John's long concert tours abroad. But friends began to urge John, for the sake of his music and most likely his health, to turn his back on the temptations of the city.
Nature and the woods here influenced his writing enormously. He said, "In Helsinki, the song died within me." So in 1904, the family moved into his house at Järvenpää, about an hour north of Helsinki. The house was called Ainola in honor of Jean's long-suffering wife. Many of the designs for the house were hers. The sauna here on their property was built according to Aino's design. This painting is Aino in the 1880s on the rocks by the seashore, before she was engaged to Jean, painted by her brother Eero Jernefelt. The youngest of the Sibelius girls, Heidi, made these ceramic vases. She was an accomplished ceramicist and earned a bronze medal for her work at the Paris World's Fair of 1937.
Jean and Aino's eldest daughter Eva said of her childhood here, "When we children were small, it seemed to us that our home, Ainola, was like a ship on the wide seas, and nothing was safe or certain outside it."
Her feeling that way was understandable. The outside world was not altogether safe. Finland was at the time an autonomous Grand Duchy ruled by the Tsar of Russia. From 1899 on, a period of resistance and social upheaval began in Finland, which culminated in their declaration of independence in 1917, the same year, of course, as the Russian Revolution. Though the declaration was final, the process was gradual. Finland acquired its own national parliament in 1906, elected by equal and universal suffrage, which made Finnish women the first in the world to be granted full national political rights. The big tune towards the end of Finlandia is one of the most famous in all classical music. It's big enough to have roused a whole people, to have embodied their aspirations, to have defined their determination. It was for them what Churchill's rhetoric was for Britain during World War II. Its scope is bigger than the sense of individual heroism that you get, say, in Puccini's Nessun Dorma from Turandot, and I dare say it's even bigger than the expression of national pride you find in something like Elgar's Land of Hope and Glory in my part of the world. There's pressure inside it. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. The Finns needed this music, and Sibelius was its conduit. You probably have to be Finnish to appreciate just how much Finlandia must have meant 100 years ago when Sibelius wrote it. It became almost de facto the Finnish national anthem during their push for independence. In fact, it bothered the Russians so much that they banned it from public performance. Fancy a nice tune like that being considered so dangerous. It must have helped, though, because the Finns won. The moral of the tale, with apologies to Noel Coward, is that it's strange how potent the people's music can be. Though Sibelius was rather surprised. He thought Finlandia was pretty insignificant, which only proves how hard it is to judge one's own work.
Inola was a place of tranquility and creativity for Sibelius, and most of his works were written here. And this dining room would have seen some interesting discussions. I can imagine one of his daughters asking him, "Papa, if your name's Johann, why does everyone call you Jean?"
Sibelius's uncle Johann had died about a year before young Johann was born, and one day the small boy was playing with some things that his uncle had left behind, and he found a small pack of calling cards, business cards we call them today. Now his uncle was a sailor and travelled widely, and so he used the French version of his name, Jean. Sibelius kept the cards and brought them out 20 years later, introducing them as his own, with the name Jean Sibelius on them, and it stuck.
1908 was a bad year for Sibelius. He was frequently sick and depressed. His doctors found a malignant tumour in his throat. After successful surgery to remove it, he was warned to give up smoking and drinking. This time the composer did as he was asked and stayed on the wagon for 8 years.
Sibelius loved listening to records, particularly of his own music, and when he did so with the volume turned right up, and sometimes he'd even press his ear against the loudspeaker to hear better. But that was pretty well the only sound that was allowed in the house. Silence was the element in which he had to compose. He wouldn't allow even plumbing because it might interfere with his concentration. He said, "Silence is speaking." The only sound, in fact, that you could hear is the same sound you can hear today, which is that of the wind soughing through the trees, a sound which permeates so much of Sibelius's music.
Sibelius was afraid of cancer and of dying, and this was reflected in his music. His Fourth Symphony was dark and brooding, full of depression, and it received a lot of negative criticism. He had a friend and patron at the time by the name of Axel Karpelan, who championed his cause and was the first to speak publicly in understanding of the difficult language of the Fourth Symphony.
At one time, Karpelan rescued Sibelius from almost certain financial ruin. When he died in 1919, Sibelius lost a great friend and wrote in his diary, "For whom will I compose now?" Jean celebrated his 50th birthday in 1915 by conducting the premiere of his Fifth Symphony. Soon after, the family left Finland to distance themselves from the growing tensions associated with the Russian Revolution.
Jean Sibelius's last published work was written in 1926. Then he effectively retired. In 1935, on the occasion of his 70th birthday, he made his last public appearance, and 7,000 guests, including 3 former presidents of the country, attended a concert in his honor. He lived to be 91. Some of his doctors might have been surprised to hear it, but as Jean said, "All of the doctors who told me not to smoke and not to drink have all died long ago, but I'm still living." In September 1957, he walked out into these woods and looked up to see a wedge of cranes flying south. He said, "Here they come, the birds of my youth." On the 20th of that month, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage here at Inola. At the very same time, Malcolm Sargent was conducting his Fifth Symphony at the University Assembly Hall in Helsinki.
Sibelius was buried right here by his family, and after the death of her beloved Jean, Aino stayed on here at Inola until her own death in June 1969.
It's an astonishing thing to do what Sibelius did when he wrote Finlandia, to embody the soul and the heart of a whole people. That's who Sibelius was when he wrote it. Just a few years after that beautiful portrait was painted, showing him for the passionate, tempestuous, fiercely concentrated genius that he was. And his people knew it. He's still their hero, their champion. 6,000 people a month come to visit this house, this symphony of wood, as Sibelius so beautifully called it.
17,000 people paid their last respects to Sibelius at his funeral service here at the Great Cathedral in Helsinki.
For such a small country, the experience has been just amazing.
Yes, and I'm so excited about our next episode because we're heading to St. Petersburg.
Tchaikovsky, Borodin, Rimsky-Korsakov, the list goes on, not to mention the art.
Absolutely.
So keep your bags packed and ready for our next classical destination. I'm Simon Callow. Goodbye from me, from Matt, and from Nikki.